Hello there, and welcome to Our Ventura TV. I'm MB Hanrahan, and today my guest is Tom Elewaut. Father Thomas Elewaut, my friend, I will just say that. And yes, Father Tom, it is June 2020. We are in the city of Ventura, original people's home of the Chumash. I am bringing you here today in light of the movement to remove the Father Serra sculpture that's for decades been in front of City Hall, to provide us some historical perspective on Father Serra, if you could. Thank you.
Sure, and thank you, MB, and good to see you, and thank you for the invitation. Just a little background on the statue itself. It was first constructed in 1936 during the WPA days. It was a concrete statue that over time weathered. I think poor concrete cement was used. And so around 1989, because the statue is owned by the city and it's on city property, but around 1989, there was a movement to recast the statue in the bronze that we have today. And so the city had a fundraiser to $100,000 to have the statue that we have today. With that in mind, you know, Serra came here into San Diego in 1769. He founded our mission in 1782, and he died in 1784. So much of the history of the mission and what happened afterwards is recognized as Serra being the father who brought this to our country, to what we call today our country. But we can't blame him for everything, but I understand he was the one that came. The unique thing about Father Serra and the Spaniards was that, yes, Serra wanted to Christianize, bring the Catholic faith to the indigenous people. And as I've said before, they were getting along just fine for about 10,000 years and had their own spirituality, but Serra believed his was a new spirituality to be shared with them. And they were to be made citizens of the Spanish crown, unlike other places like Great Britain on the East Coast. And the reason why was because the Russians were coming from the north, and the Spaniards wanted the indigenous people to be made citizens of the crown, to share the Catholic faith, to inhabit the land, and then protect the land from the invaders coming from the north. That was the ideal. What happened was during the 60 years of the mission era, which is basically 1769 through the 60 years to 1820s, about 50,000 indigenous people died. Almost all of them due to disease that the Europeans didn't realize that they had no immune system, almost like our pandemic we're dealing with today. Was there some maltreatment among the indigenous? Absolutely. Were there some bad priests in that era? Absolutely. And Serra punished them as according to the dictates of the day. But when also the indigenous people had an uprising in San Diego, Serra went all the way, not by car, not by airplane, not by train, all the way on foot to the Viceroy in Mexico to have a Bill of Rights to protect the indigenous people. Nevertheless, their culture was suppressed, their language was suppressed, death occurred. The second 60 years during the Mexican revolt and uprising, during the 49er gold rush, and also during the American occupation of this land, 233,000 indigenous people died. And it wasn't all because of disease. If we're going to point the finger, the Americans had a bounty on it. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. All of that said, the fact is we're at a time now where sometimes our history has glorified the mission era, glorified Father Serra, and failed to aptly correct and represent what really happened. And so we have the milieu that we're in today. My heartfelt goes out to the indigenous people, the Chumash. I have a wonderful personal relationship with Julie Tulamite, the elder spokesperson for the tribe here locally. We get along very well. All of us want to protect the statue, but we also feel that because of the hurt, because of what it represents, the beginning of the colonization, if you will, of this area, that it should be removed off the public property. And actually their first request was, do we have room for it here at the mission? They don't want it damaged, they don't want it destroyed, it's part of a history, they just would feel more comfortable having it out of public view on public property. And this came about not because of the Chumash presently, or the mission, or the city. It came about for those who called for a protest that we all got brought into. So we signed a joint statement to protect the statue, for the city to go through its legal process to declassify it. And the Archdiocese of Los Angeles has said, if you're going to move it, the Archdiocese would like to receive it as property. And that seems to be the goal in hand. And I must say, I thank Julie Tulamite, the elders of the Chumash, because if it wasn't for their stance, that statue would not be standing today. But they said, we want to do this peacefully, we want to do it respectfully, and we want to do it with the full acknowledgement of what really happened during the mission era and thereafter.
Father, I am really grateful to you to have such a concise and clear message of history. And in going forth, it seems that it's possible that a statue such as that, and even on the mission grounds, can be now a further education tool in conjunction with people that have a historical perspective to teach a more fuller history. Because I think I don't know, but it seems going forth, we can't go back in time, but to refine and be inclusive and more honest.
Yes.
And put out, and art has always been a really important, obviously an extremely powerful symbolic tool for good and for bad. And so I'm grateful to hear of this community motivation to do good with the sculpture.
And to that end, not about the sculpture, but the education, our bishops in California, since the canonization of St. Ventura Serra in 2015, have developed a more accurate curriculum that is now being taught in all of our Catholic schools to give not just a rosy picture, but the real picture of how it affected the indigenous people. And that is a real concern, that we cannot just whitewash and say that everything was just perfect, because it wasn't. But it wasn't a purposeful outcome, at least during the mission era per se, but a byproduct of not knowing science and medical history. For instance, also Sarah, who they brought cattle with them and wanted to give milk to the indigenous people, they didn't realize that they were lactose intolerant. And so he kept sending them back to their own villages until they get well, and then they come back, they drink the cow's milk, they get sick. And it took them a while to figure out that, oh, this cow's milk is not good for them. So, we have to look at the full picture. But nevertheless, the indigenous people were hurt. We need reconciliation, and we need to help them to regain their culture as best we can. That is why I allow my personal private office to be used at their request when they want to have language courses. I invite them usually on Sunday afternoons. I'm doing other things on Sundays, so my office is available, and they are more than welcome, and they have used it in the past and probably will continue to do so in the future.
Father Tom, thank you so much again, and it remains to be seen. More will be revealed. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today on OurVentura TV, and we will see you again.